going to look at mattress stitch for garter stitch knitting. So here I have two pieces that I have created, and the left one is got two colors of striping, and then at the top part it has some decreases along this edge to make it diagonal, and then this piece on the right kind of fits it, goes straight in two colors, and then it has diagonal increases on the edge. And I want to sew these two together using mattress stitch. So the first thing is to leave a yarn that's long enough for the sewing that we need to do. So in general, I like to leave a yarn that is 4 times the length of the seam. So first I'm going to put the ball through this loop here to fasten it off. So generally when fastening off, you cut the yarn and then you insert the end of the yarn through the loop, the last loop of the knitting. There we go. Okay, so now how to measure. So 4 times the length of this seam. So I'm just going to draw the yarn down along this seam here. So that's one length there. And then I'm going to take that and run the yarn back and forth like this. So there's 3 times, and then one last time for 4 times. So I have 4 times the length, so I'm going to cut that off, and that's going to be the length of yarn that I'm going to use. Okay. So I have a tapestry needle. I like this one because it has a little bent end. Makes it easier to sew. I'm going to thread my yarn onto that. And then I'm going to turn my knitting this way. I don't oftentimes do mattress stitch on a surface, but we'll do that for purposes of demonstration. So I'm going to start on this diagonal seam. And as with the general technique for seaming with mattress stitch, garter stitch edges, I'm going to be alternating between bumps on one piece of fabric and bumps on the other side of the fabric. And so first, I just want to count how many I've got here. It looks like I have 9. 2, 4, 6, 8, 9. Good. Okay. Got the yarn tied off here, and so I'm going to go through the first bump on this, right on the edge of the stitch on the upper piece, and pull it through. It's got quite a bit of yarn right now to deal with. And then the same thing. I'm going to go through the bump on the lower piece of the material. And then I'm going to pull it. And I don't want to pull too tight because I want this to be a nice sort of giving, not tense or tight seam. So I'm just going to go back and forth and kind of leave it not loose, but kind of the same amount of yarn as I would have in a typical knitted stitch. So I'm just going to go back and forth. Between these two. And so this, you can see that this technique works well for diagonal edges as well as straight edges. Okay, now we've finished the diagonal part of the seam, and we can see that's coming together pretty well. Now, in general, when seaming together pieces, we want to make sure that color transitions are aligned. And so you can see here that we want to align, this color change right here on that side with this color change right here. And also, we want to make sure that the yarn that we're using for the seam matches one or the other of the two pieces that are being seamed together. That's really important because if you use a different color, then obviously that thread that you're using for the seaming is going to show. So typically I like to use the darker color if possible, but either color is really fine. So now one thing I can do when I finish this is I can take an extra little stitch right at the color transition along around the last set of bumps, just to make sure that everything stays lined up. I sometimes do this, especially if it looks like I'm going to have trouble with them not wanting to stay lined up. So you just go around that stitch, kind of making a circle around the last stitch, and that'll make sure that everything is nice and lined up. There we go. Okay, so now I'm going to continue, and I'm going to use mattress stitch, going through alternating bumps or matching bumps on either side down the remainder of this seam here. Okay, so here I am at the bottom of this piece, this second little segment here, and just to make sure things stay lined up again, I'm going to go around and take a second little stitch here, just to make sure that these color transitions stay nice and aligned. So I'm just kind of making a circle back around that stitch, just to make sure they're aligned. And then I can continue on. Okay, so there. We finished that garter stitch seam worked in mattress stitch. And this is what it looks like on the front. And this is what it looks like on the back. So this is just some draped yarn between these two uses here, but you can see that that seam looks really as good on the back as it does on the front, almost. Okay, so to review, we use the same color yarn as one of the pieces that we're seaming together. We can take an extra stitch at the end of each, at the end of the color transition or at the color transition to make sure pieces stay aligned properly. We want to do it somewhat loosely, definitely not tight, in order to make sure that the fabric will stretch as shown here. And it works both on diagonal and on straight seams. So leave 3 to 4 times the length of yarn as, measure the seam length and then run the yarn back and forth in order to get 3 to 4 times the length. So here you can see I've got a little bit of yarn left over. Probably I could have done this seam in 3 lengths of yarn. But I would have been probably cutting it a little bit short. So, and I like to err on the side of having more rather than less. And the last thing is that you're alternating knitting the bumps back and forth down the seam. So if you had, for some reason, an unequal number of bumps to work with, you would have to count them up and then figure out what your cadence is going to be in the seam. All right, well, thank you for joining. I hope this helps with your mattress stitch for garter stitch sewing, and happy knitting.